Great Britain was the last remaining country to resist Germany. In July 1940, this is what Europe looked like on a map. Germany is occupied by dictator Adolf Hitler, and almost all countries are surrounded. Austria, Poland, Norway, Belgium, Denmark, France, all of those countries, where Hitler marched. In Italy, in the south, a different dictator ruled, Mussolini. He made an alliance with Hitler. They worked together. So, by and large, only 3 major countries remained in Europe: Germany, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain. There was also a partial agreement between Germany and the Soviet Union. So Hitler doesn't have to worry about the Soviet Union, because the Soviets didn't want to take Germany. This means that Britain was the last European country to oppose Germany. On the other side of the world, America didn't want to get involved in this war. They stayed away. This raises the question, how has the situation changed? How was Hitler defeated? Let's understand the entire history of World War II in this video. This is the third part of World War II. In the first and second part, we saw how World War II began. And in this part, we'll see how it ended, and how Hitler finally was defeated. If you haven't seen the first and second parts yet, you will find the link in the description. Hitler believed Winston Churchill wanted to sign a peace treaty with Hitler after the fighting ended. Churchill would not want to endanger his country because the German army was so much stronger. Winston Churchill delivered an iconic speech. He made it clear that there would be no peace agreement between Churchill and Hitler.
We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender!
There would be no peace treaty between Churchill and Hitler. The war with Germany would continue. This speech meant that Hitler also wanted to invade the United Kingdom. And Hitler tried to do this. Hitler's planned Operation Sea Lion to invade the British. They had to come up with a strategy to attack Britain. There is no land connection between the United Kingdom and mainland Europe, so the army could not simply be deployed. If they tried to send ships, Britain's Royal Navy would have more ships than Germany. The Germans would be perplexed. Hitler then decided to establish control over the airspace. Air Force Luftwaffe had 2,600 aircraft, and the United Kingdom only had 700 planes. 10th of July 1940, Hitler attacked Great Britain from the air. The German Luftwaffe is attacked by bombing raids. Their original goal was to destroy aircraft, airfields, and production facilities. The small British Royal Air Force, which was a quarter the size of the German Luftwaffe, they tried their best to defend their land. It was a hard fight there, but in the end the British suffered heavy losses. Eventually the Germans began attacking at night. August 24, 1940 was such a night when some German pilots accidentally bombed London. Many civilians are killed.
The great fire in the city of London, almost to be compared with the fire of London in 1666. Pictures that look like hell on earth.
Winston Churchill was caught off guard by the war. Cities were attacked. He chose to do the same. The UK reacted by bombing Berlin. When Hitler saw this, unlike before, he was not interested in bombing London. But when he saw this, cities were already being bombed by Great Britain. He chose to destroy London. September 15, 1940, Hitler orders the German Luftwaffe to carry out a decisive major attack. More than 1,000 fighter aircraft were to be deployed simultaneously to finish the city as quickly as possible. Imagine the view that people would have seen on that fateful day. More than 1,000 fighter aircraft and jets fly in the sky. They come to bomb your country. To be more precise, there were 1120 aircraft, of which 620 were fighters and 500 were bombers. The British are preparing their Royal Air Force. They only had 630 planes. On this day, a historic battle occurred in the sky.
A wave of 100 bombers and 400 fighters was intercepted. Fighting raged all the way through the coast.
The British Royal Air Force has shot down more planes than the Luftwaffe, and lost in 29 planes. The British were able to successfully stop the German Luftwaffe's attack. This is known as Battle of Britain Day. What was the reason for this? You may be asking yourself, How could the all-powerful German Air Force fall prey to the British Air Force with more planes? The reason is simple. When a country is attacked and invades another country, the invader aims to gain something. But for the defending country it is, in the truest sense of the word, a question of existence. If they don't fight with all their might, the country would be wiped out. There would be no place left for its citizens. There are big differences in the motivation of soldiers. The Battle of Britain Day was one of the first major casualties for Hitler. For the first time in World War II, Hitler knew there was little chance of this mission being successful. Operation Sea Lion was postponed, and Hitler moved his focus from the UK to the Soviet Union. In April 1941, the map looked like this. Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria in Eastern Europe have formed an alliance with Germany. They became part of the Axis powers. Moving eastward, the countries Yugoslavia and Greece were already occupied by Hitler. Actually, Italian dictator Mussolini was occupying Libya and Greece. But the British, presented in the Mediterranean Sea, was more powerful. The Italian forces couldn't deal with it alone, so to defeat the British forces, Hitler sent some German troops to Libya to help the Italians fight. With this, Yugoslavia and Greece were also occupied. Interestingly enough, Hitler wasn't too interested in invading Britain. Hitler wanted to sign a peace treaty with Britain. He wanted to concentrate on the USSR and to defeat it so that Britain can, through fear and terror, and they will sign the peace treaty. But why did he want to invade the Soviet Union if there was already a peace treaty in place? The real reason for this was the Hitler ideology. He detested communists. In addition, he believed that Germany could only become the #1 superpower in the world if a country as large as the Wise Union was conquered, because then the Germans would control so much country. Essentially, Hitler suffered from megalomania. He believed himself to be the ruler of the world. He was insane with power. He believed that he could achieve anything, that he could control the entire world. But attacking the Union was a big mistake on Hitler's part. In fact, this became a turning point in the Second World War. Hitler's plan was simple: the manner in which he invaded France. He wanted to break into the Soviet Union in a similar way, by dividing the German forces into 3 parts. The first group was supposed to move through the Baltics towards Leningrad, the city in which Stalin resided. The second group would strike Moscow, and the third group would attack from the south through Ukraine. This operation started on June 22, 1941. The Soviet Union was much larger than the Germans. They had 20,000 tanks, and the Germans had only 6,000 tanks. But there was one big difference: German technology was much higher than the Soviets. This is why Hitler still had the upper hand in this war. To protect itself, the Soviet Union merged with Great Britain and become part of the Allied powers.
Mr. Molotov signed for the Soviet this vitally important undertaking on the part of both countries to fight Hitlerite Germany till victory is won. Neither country to negotiate or conclude a separate peace.
Together they devised a plan to send supplies to the Surveyors Union Army. They decided to take a route through Iran, but the problem was that the Iranian government favored Hitler. For this reason, Great Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran together. This was not very beneficial, as Hitler's Blitzkrieg strategy helped the Germans to invade 100 kilometers in 2 days and occupy a large part of the territory of the Soviet Union. A few weeks later, they had come so far that they were only 300 kilometers from Moscow. At this point, there was some disagreement between Hitler and his military leaders. For this reason, the next German advance was delayed until October 1941. It was beginning to get colder. The cold season gave the Soviet Union an advantage. They were accustomed to fighting in the cold. On the other hand, the Soviet Union had their second advantage with Japan. Japan and Swan had signed a non-aggression agreement. This means that there are troops of the Soviet army stationed on the eastern border. In the fight with Japan, they were able to bring the West and Germany back to defend their country. In December 1941, there was another twist in our story. Japan suddenly attacked the U.S. Pearl Harbor base, without any provocation. More than 2,300 American troops were killed. At this point, America did not want to become involved in World War II. Whatever was happening in Europe so far, America was watching it from a distance but didn't want to get involved. They had enough in the First World War. So America stayed out of the Second World War. But after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, America had enough. At this point, America formally declared war on Japan and entered World War II, Second World War.
I ask that the Congress declare a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
America entered into the alliance with the Allied forces. It included major countries such as the United Kingdom, the Union, and China. If you are wondering why was Pearl Harbor bombed, it had its own backstory, which we will talk another time about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. America needed a few months to prepare for war before entering the war. Then, in early 1942, Japan continued to invade and occupy countries like Thailand and Cambodia. In mid-1942, Hitler decided to concentrate on the southern Soviet Union supply chain from Iran. You decide to disrupt that. And so there was a devastating battle in the city of Stalingrad. The army of the Soviet Union was able to successfully defend itself against the German army. Successful. On the other side of the world, the Allied forces and America attacked the Japanese territories in the South Pacific. This is known as the Battle of Midway. 4 important Japanese aircraft and supplier aircraft carriers were destroyed. In June 1942,
in the Battle of Midway, the Japanese carrier fleet, the mightiest in existence, was utterly destroyed. Japan, at the height of her military power, lost not only a major naval engagement, but in a single day doomed the Japanese Empire to ruin and defeat.
By the end of 1942, the British Army managed to successfully expel the German and Italian forces from Egypt. The battle for Stalingrad lasted a long time. November 1942, winter months again, it is becoming more and more difficult for the German army to fight. At a time, Stalingrad almost gained total control, but the Soviets continued to fight until the end. The Battle of Style was the deadliest battle of World War II. Finally, the Soviet soldiers were successful. Almost 300,000 German troops present in Stalingrad were surrounded by Soviet troops. Those soldiers surrendered in February 1943.
The heroic defense of Stalingrad. The Soviet army turning the Nazi 6-month assault into the most ghastly military disaster in German history. Hands held high, the beaten Nazis pour from house after house in abject surrender.
This was the biggest turning point in the Second World War. During the Second World War, a few months later, in July 1943, Italian citizens overthrew the dictator Mussolini. An anti-fascist moment literally arose among the Italian masses. The civilians were fed up with their circumstances and revolted against their dictator. Mussolini was executed by village-based Italian partisans. Partisans are civilians who take up weapons to fight for a cause.
Bombastic Mussolini, the sawdust Caesar, comes to his end in the gutter, fitting climax to a life of treachery and double-cross. He led his country to ruin when he threw his lot in with Hitler.
A new government was found in Italy, and this new government decided to stop fighting against the Allied forces. Suddenly, confidence grew among the elite countries that they could actually defeat Hitler. In November 1943, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill met in Tehran to discuss how to end the Second World War. June 6, 1944, another historic day known as D-Day. On this day, the Allied forces begin the horrific operation of landing on the battlefields. More than 150,000 British, American, and Canadian soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy in France. They were supposed to fight on land against the German army in order to liberate France. After the evacuation of Dunkirk a few years ago, this was the first time that the British army was on site to fight the German army.
Another of the great decisive battles of world history has been joined. This is the day for which free people long have waited. This is D-Day.
For Hitler, this was a dangerous situation. Hitler had ordered his army to focus on the Soviet Union. They suffered casualties due to the cold and were unable to fully defeat the Soviet Union. And now they were also being attacked by the Western Front. Hitler decided that it was better to withdraw the army from the Eastern Front in order to concentrate the counterattack on the advancing Allied forces. As soon as Hitler withdrew his army from the Soviet Union, there was a violent counterattack by the Soviets. 2 months later, the Soviets retook around 600 kilometers of territory from Germany. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania were under Soviet occupation. On the other side, the Allied forces also landed in southern France. One country after another was liberated. The army was expelled. Yugoslavia threw off German troops under its own power. Germany was attacked from 3 sides. Hitler's last great offensive, the Battle of the Bulge.
Reserves of men and material had been hoarded for the day of counterattack. The very much alive German army gathered its forces in the Forest Isles to strike one strong, decisive blow at the American army.
In the forest region of Ardennes, the German army intended to drive out the Allied forces. Before the official invasion of Germany, Allied forces conducted devastating air raids on German cities.
The aerial phase of the West Front offensive mounts to full fury in one single day of colossal attack. This is the greatest Allied air offensive since D-Day.
In February 1945, the Yalta Conference was held in Crimea, where it was announced that any country that declared war on Germany could join the Allied forces in attacking Germany. Venezuela, Uruguay, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria. Almost 30,000 people were every day killed. Allied forces found out about Hitler's concentration camps, where hundreds of thousands of Jews were brutally murdered. Allied forces continued bombing German cities. This was later criticized by some who claimed that it was unnecessary to bomb German cities, which killed numerous civilians. Cities like Dresden crumbled. It is said that the bombings were not necessary as Hitler could be killed on the ground. At this point, it was clear that Hitler was on the brink of defeat. In May 1945, Berlin was surrounded by the Soviet army. 2 days earlier, on April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide. And in May 8th, 1945, Germany officially capitulated.
The Union Jack goes up to signalize the taking over by the British troops of their sector of Berlin. The date is July the 6th, 1945. A date the history books will remember.
The German areas were divided. East Germany and West Germany were formed. Poland was recreated from a large part of East Germany. The borders of many countries were redrawn. Today, the map of Europe you see looks the way it does because of the Second World War. In October 1945, the United Nations was created to ensure that there would be no more world wars.
They have made a beginning, a brave beginning that can build a mighty structure for peace. Out of a world of agony and total war has come a charter that must mark a turning point in human history. A new way lies ahead.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.